Jean always had a way with words, and Linda once thought that was part of his magic. The way he laughed, that little tilt of his head when he teased her. It used to make her heart skip. But tonight, it wasn't charming. Tonight, sitting across it, the restaurant table under the dim golden lights, Jean's words didn't just bruise, they crushed. "You're so sentimental, Linda," he said with a scoff, swirling the last bit of wine in his glass. "You act like every little date, every moment, means something epic. It's not that deep. It's not real the way you think it is." Linda blinked. She thought she had misheard him. Maybe the clinking of glasses around them had blurred his words. Maybe the noise had twisted the meaning. But when she looked up, she saw the smirk curling on his lips, the kind that used to be playful, but now felt like a blade. "So all this," she whispered, motioning between them, "all this time, it was just nothing." John shrugged, like she had asked him about the weather. "It's just fun. It doesn't have to mean forever, Linda. You take things too seriously. It's kinda cheap when you overplay it. You know, cheap." The words slammed into her like cold water. She sat frozen for a moment, trying to breathe without falling apart. Around them, couples laughed. Waiters moved between tables. Glasses clinked. But for Linda, everything had gone mute, except for the hammering of her heart. Betty had warned her once, months ago, after a night out when Jean had too much to drink and started flirting a little too hard with the bartender. Betty, with her sharp eyes and sharper instincts, had pulled Linda aside and said, "Girl, love yourself first. Jean's chasing thrills, not futures." Linda had brushed it off. She thought Betty was jealous, bitter maybe, because she and Santos had been on the rocks. But sitting here now, facing Jean's casual cruelty, Linda realized Betty had seen the cracks long before. Linda even noticed the tremble. She pushed her chair back slowly. Jean didn't even seem surprised. Maybe he thought she'd make a scene. Cry, plead, beg him to see her worth. But Linda just stood up, smoothing her dress down with trembling fingers. "I see," she said quietly. He looked amused, like this was just another one of her overreactions he would later laugh about with his friends, probably even Santos, who hung out with Jean more than anyone these days. Maybe they'd joke about how easily girls break when you tell them the truth. Linda pulled out her phone as Jean leaned back lazily in his chair, watching her. Maybe he thought she was going to call a cab. Maybe he thought she'd text Betty for a comfort. But no, Linda did something simpler, colder. She opened the shared album, the one full of their pictures, from lazy Sunday mornings to vacations they could barely afford. She tapped Select All. She hit Delete. Then she opened her saved messages, the thread where Jean had first told her he loved her, where they'd made silly plans to move in together, to get a dog, to grow old on some stupid porch swing. She hit Delete again. Jean was frowning now. "What are you doing?" he asked, the first crack of uncertainty creeping into his voice. Linda tucked her phone back into her purse. She looked at him, really looked, and realized she didn't love this version of him at all. Maybe she never had. Maybe she had loved a fantasy, and Jean was just the stranger she had dressed in the clothes of her dreams. Without a word, she turned and walked away, past the laughing couples, past the glittering bar, past the life she thought she was building. Jean didn't call after her. He didn't run. He just let her go. And this time, Linda knew she wasn't coming back. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of rain, even though the sky still held back. Linda stood for a moment under the awning, feeling the low thrum of the city around her. Her heart should have been shattered, she thought. After everything, after all those promises and late-night talks, But instead, there was just this hollow calm settling into her bones. Like her body already knew the worst was over, she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and started walking without a real destination. The city lights blurred in her eyes, and she welcomed it. Better to look at nothing clearly for a while. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. Jean, she was sure. She ignored it. Betty's apartment wasn't far. Linda wasn't sure if she was heading there yet, but somehow her feet kept moving in that direction. Betty had always been the one to see things first, to say the hard truths Linda didn't want to hear. And maybe now, maybe tonight, Linda was ready to listen. Cross town, Jean sat alone at their table, the half-empty wine glass sweating against the polished wood. For a moment, he watched Linda's retreating figure through the window. He expected her to turn around, to storm back in, throw accusations, demand explanations. That's how it usually went when girls got emotional, right? But she didn't. She just left. And that left Jean with a sharp, sudden emptiness he hadn't prepared for. He pulled out his phone and saw no missed calls, no frantic messages, just the last text Linda had sent earlier that day. Can't wait to see you tonight. Been thinking of you all day. It hit differently now. Like a joke, he was the punchline too. Santos showed up an hour later, laughing and clapping Jean on the back, like nothing was wrong. He pulled up a chair without asking, ordered a drink, and started telling some story about a girl he was chasing. Jean tried to listen, tried to laugh, but the words felt heavy in his mouth. "You all right, man?" Santos finally asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Jean said quickly. Too quickly. Santos wasn't stupid. He leaned back, watching Jean with that lazy, calculating look. "Linda dump you," Jean scoffed, trying to shake it off. "She's just sensitive. Took something the wrong way. She'll come around." Santos laughed. "Bro, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they grow a backbone overnight. You forget, Linda ain't the clingy type. She's got options." The words stung, more than John expected. He tried to brush it off, waving for another drink. But the image of Linda walking away, calm and unbroken, stayed burning at the edges of his mind. Meanwhile, Linda found herself on Betty's doorstep, heart pounding, harder now than it had all night. She hesitated before knocking, wondering if it was too late, wondering if Betty would even want to see her, after how many times Linda had ignored her warnings. The door swung open before Linda could finish the thought. Betty stood there in an oversized t-shirt, hair in a messy bun, no makeup, and still looking like she owned the night. Her sharp eyes softened the second she saw Linda's face. "You ready to stop lying to yourself?" Betty asked quietly, no judgment in her voice. Linda let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She nodded. Betty stepped aside, letting her in without another word. Linda walked into the warm, lived-in chaos of Betty's apartment, into the smell of old candles and Chinese takeout, and for the first time in months, she felt something real crack open inside her, something stronger than heartbreak. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not fireworks, not grand gestures, just standing up, choosing yourself, and walking away from the people who thought your love was cheap. Linda sank into the worn couch as Betty handed her a blanket and a cups of something hot. "You're not weak, you know," Betty said as she curled up next to her. Took guts to walk away. Linda managed a small smile, feeling it reach her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Yeah," she whispered. It did. And somewhere across the city, as Jean scrolled through his empty photo albums, feeling more alone than he ever had, Linda tucked herself deeper into the safety of her own new beginning. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains in Betty's living room, dragging Linda awake before she was ready. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange weight of freedom on her chest. It was heavier than she imagined. Heavier, but cleaner somehow. Like breathing cold air after being trapped underground for too long. Betty was already in the kitchen, moving around in that noisy way she always did. Clattering plates, humming a little, off-key, Linda sat up slowly, the blanket falling into her lap, and for a second, she wondered if John had even noticed she didn't come back, if he cared. But then she pushed the thought away like a spider on her skin. It didn't matter anymore. She had deleted him, not just from her phone, but from the place he had no business living anymore. Her heart. Coffee. Betty called out without looking, already pouring a second mug. Linda smiled a little and got up, padding across the floor in her socks. Betty handed her the mug and leaned against the counter, watching her over the rim of her cup. "You look like hell," Betty said casually, but her eyes were kind. "Thanks," Linda said with a dry laugh, feeling the sting of the words, but knowing it was true. "So," Betty started, stretching the word out. "You gonna mope here all day, or you got a plan?" Linda hesitated, holding the coffee close to her lips. Did she have a plan? Last night felt so final, so righteous. But now, in the daylight, reality loomed bigger. Her apartment was full of John, his shoes under her bed, his stupid cologne clinging to her pillows, his notes stuck to her fridge. She couldn't live inside that tomb. "I need to get my stuff," she said finally. "I need to erase him from my real life too." Betty grinned, a little feral. Now that's the spirit. Across town, Gene woke up alone for the first time in months. At first he didn't notice. He rolled over, reaching for his phone, scrolling mindlessly. It took him a few seconds to remember why the bed felt colder, why there was a yawning silence in his apartment. No texts, no calls, no Linda. He checked their shared photo album again. Like maybe he had imagined it, but it was still gone. All those memories, all those pictures of laughing faces, lazy mornings, clumsy kisses, deleted without a trace, like they never happened. A tightness gripped his chest that he hadn't expected. He told himself it was pride, ego maybe, not regret, not anything soft. But deep down, a seed of fear was growing. Linda wasn't coming back. Santos swung by later, tossing a football between his hands like he had no real purpose for being there. Gene tried to act normal, slouched on the couch, tossing back beer after beer, laughing too loudly at stupid jokes. But even Santos noticed it. The sharpness in Gene's movements, the way his laugh never reached his eyes. "You know," Santos said, finally setting the football down. "Girls like Linda, they don't forgive. Being mocked, you made her feel small, man. That's the one thing you can unsay." Gene didn't respond. He couldn't. He just sat there, staring blankly at the wall, hearing Linda's voice from last night over and over again. "I see." At Betty's, Linda finished her coffee and grabbed her bag. She felt stronger today, more decided. Betty offered to go with her, but Linda shook her head. She had to do this alone. The city felt sharper, more real as she took the subway across town. Every jolt of the train, every buzz of her phone, every gust of wind hitting her face. It all reminded her she was alive. Painfully, beautifully alive. When she reached her apartment, she stood outside the door for a moment, her key trembling. In her hand, she half expected Gene to be waiting inside, wearing that charming, boyish smile that had fooled her so easily once. Maybe he'd say he was sorry. Maybe he wouldn't say anything at all. It didn't matter. She wasn't here for apologies. She was here to erase him, and this time she wasn't asking permission. Linda pushed the door open slowly, half bracing herself for the ghost of her old life to slap her in the face. But the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. A few dust motes floated in the early afternoon light, spinning lazily through the air like nothing had changed. But everything had. She stepped inside, letting the door click softly behind her. Gene's shoes were still by the door, his leather jacket thrown over the arm of the couch, the way he always left it. The sight used to make her smile, used to feel like home. Now it just made her stomach twist. She moved quickly. She had made a mental list on the train. What was hers? What needed to go? Clothes, books, the framed photos she had paid for. She wasn't here to argue about who bought the coffee table or the stupid toaster. She just wanted her life back, stripped, clean of him, in the bedroom. The bed was still unmade from 2 nights ago, when Jean had kissed her lazily, pulling her under the covers without a word. She swallowed hard and yanked open her drawers, stuffing clothes into a bag as fast as she could. Each piece she pulled out felt like peeling off a memory, some good, some so bitter now they made her fingers itch. She was half done when the door opened behind her. She didn't turn. "Linda," Jean's voice said, low, careful. She zipped her suitcase with one sharp tug. "Linda, come on, don't do this like it's nothing." She finally turned to face him. His hair was messy, like he had just rolled out of bed, his shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. If it were a movie, this would be the scene where the guy realizes he's made a terrible mistake and pleads for another chance. But Linda had seen enough movies to know real life wasn't that pretty. "You already did," she said, voice steady. "You did it last night when you called my love cheap." Jean stepped closer, hands out like he could physically pull the words back. "I was drunk. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't." Linda tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a painting she had stared at too long, and was only now seeing the flaws in. "You meant it," she said simply. "Maybe you didn't mean to say it out loud, but you meant it." Jean flinched, just barely, but she caught it. "Look," he said, pushing a hand through his hair. "We can fix this. We always do." "No," Linda said, and even she was surprised by how calm she sounded. "We don't fix things. I forgive, you forget, and then we start all over again, like nothing happened." He looked desperate now, stepping closer, reaching for her hand. She pulled it back before he could touch her. "Linda, please," he said, voice cracking. "Don't throw us away." She laughed. Then, a short broken sound. "I didn't throw us away, Jean. You did. Every time you mocked me, every time you treated my heart like a joke. You chipped away at it. Last night, that was just the last piece." Jean stood there, arms dropping uselessly at his sides, watching her grab the last of her things. Linda almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But she had spent too long feeling sorry for a man who never once truly said sorry to her. She dragged the suitcase to the door, pausing only once to glance around the apartment that used to be their home. It was just a space now. Walls and furniture. No warmth. No future. As she stepped out, Jean called her name one last time. "Linda!" She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Outside, the sky finally cracked open, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Linda lifted her face to the storm, letting the water wash away the last of her tears, the last of her doubts. She was free, and Jean was nothing more than a memory she had already deleted. The rain had soaked through Linda's jacket by the time she reached the corner, but she didn't care. For once, the chill of the water felt good, like it was scouring her clean. She stood under a flickering street lamp, the suitcase at her side, and watched the city blur and pulse around her. A cab pulled up without her even signaling. Maybe the universe was finally cutting her a break. Betty's address rolled off her tongue before she even thought about it. The driver nodded and pulled into the flow of traffic, the wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the windshield. Linda leaned back into the cracked leather seat, pressing her forehead to the cool glass. Her chest ached, but it was a different kind of pain now, less like drowning, more like sore muscles after a long climb. Her phone buzzed again in her lap. She didn't need to check. It would be John. It would be another half-hearted apology, another string of empty words, thrown like a rope, hoping she was still drowning enough to grab it. Linda turned the phone face down without answering. Back at the apartment, Jean sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door Linda had just walked out of. Again. He didn't know why he thought this time would be different. Maybe because she always forgave him before. Maybe because he thought she needed him more than he needed her. Maybe because he was a fool who didn't recognize the difference between love and habit. Santos texted him, "You good?" Jean didn't answer. What was there to say? He had won the argument, but lost the only person who ever believed he was more than his worst impulses. The cab rolled to a stop in front of Betty's building. Linda paid the driver and dragged her suitcase up the steps, her fingers trembling with cold, but her spine straight. Betty opened the door before Linda even knocked, like she had been waiting there the whole time. "No turning back now," Betty said with a crooked smile. "No," Linda said, stepping inside. No turning back. They spent the evening sorting through Linda's stuff, laying it out in piles on the floor. Betty had set up a tiny corner in her spare room, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, but to Linda, it looked like a kingdom. Every now and then, Betty would shoot her a look, a proud, measuring look, like she was seeing Linda for the first time in a long time. Like Linda had been buried under all the maybes and what ifs, and was finally clawing her way back out. By midnight, Linda's suitcase was empty, her clothes folded neatly into Betty's drawers, and the last glass of wine was drained. "You're gonna be fine," Betty said softly, squeezing her hand. Linda squeezed back, blinking hard against the sudden rush of emotion. "I'm gonna be better than fine," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The next few days were a strange kind of rebirth. Linda started job hunting again, something she had given up on months ago when Jean told her he could take care of things if she just relaxed a little. She met with old friends she had drifted away from, people she thought she had lost. Turns out, all she had to do was reach out. They had been waiting, hoping to. Betty dragged her out to a tiny bar on Friday night, one of those gritty little places that didn't care if your shoes were wet from the rain or if you were wearing yesterday's eyeliner. Linda sat at the bar, sipping a cheap beer, feeling a kind of lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. And that's when Santos walked in. Linda stiffened automatically, feeling Betty's hand press lightly against her back in warning. Santos spotted them almost immediately. His mouth twitched into a crooked grin, and he sauntered over like nothing in the world was complicated. "Well, well," he said, leaning on the bar beside them. "If it isn't the strongest woman in the city," Linda raised an eyebrow. "Did Jean send you?" Santos laughed, but there was something bitter underneath it. "Nah, Jean's too busy feeling sorry for himself. He thinks you'll cave." Linda sipped her beer and smiled coolly. "He's wrong." Santos nodded, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, passing through his eyes. "Good," he said. "You deserve better." Linda didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her silence said it all. For the first time, she wasn't the one begging to be seen. She was the one walking away, and this time, she wasn't leaving anything of herself behind. The next morning, Linda woke up earlier than usual, sunlight warming her face through Betty's thin curtains. She stretched under the covers, her muscles sore, but in a good way, like she had spent the night running from something dark and heavy, and finally outrun it. There were no unread texts from Jean, no missed calls, no desperate voicemails. Linda wasn't sure if that made her feel victorious or just numb, but either way, it was better than the ache she had lived with before. Down the hall, Betty was already bustling around, singing off-key again. Linda smiled at the sound. It felt good, real. It reminded her that life kept moving, even when your heart felt like it had stalled out. Betty peeked her head into the room, waving a piece of paper. "Guess who's got a job interview today?" she said in a sing-song voice. Linda sat up so fast, the blanket tangled around her waist. Seriously, Betty grinned. "You sent out a resume to a marketing agency on Tuesday. They called this morning." Linda's heart raced. It had been so long since she had even dared to hope for something better, something her own, without Jean looming over her like a shadow. "What time?" she asked, swinging her legs out of bed. 2:00, Betty said, tossing the paper onto the bed. "You've got time to get gorgeous," Linda laughed. But there was a tight coil of nerves in her stomach. She hadn't interviewed for anything in almost a year. Jean always made it sound like she didn't need to, like she was chasing silly dreams that would never matter. "Just stay home, Linda. Relax. I've got you." His voice slithered through her mind, unwelcome and stale. She pushed it out. She chose a soft blue blouse and black slacks, the kind of outfit that made her feel sharp, capable. She tied her hair back neatly, applied just enough makeup to feel polished, but not hidden. And when she looked in the mirror, for the first time in a long time, she saw herself. Not Jean's girlfriend, not someone's almost, just Linda. At the agency, she waited in the lobby, pretending to scroll through her phone while her nerves rattled in her chest. Other candidates sat nearby, tapping shoes, whispering into Bluetooth headsets. Everyone looked so confident, so polished. Linda closed her eyes for a second. "You're not broken. You're free." When her name was called, she stood up, smoothed her blouse, and walked toward the future with steady steps. The interview went better than she could have dreamed. They asked about her experience, her ideas, her ambitions. And for the first time, Linda answered without shrinking herself down. She didn't apologize for wanting things. She didn't soften her edges to make herself easier to swallow. When she stepped back out onto the street an hour later, she felt a wild grin tugging at her mouth. She had done it, no matter what happened. Next, she had stood up and said, "I'm here. I matter." She was halfway down the block when she spotted him. Jean, leaning against a streetlight, wearing that same worn leather jacket, head bowed, kicking at the ground like a sulky kid. He hadn't seen her yet. For one long, breathless moment, Linda stood frozen. Part of her, the old part, the wounded part, wanted to run, to ask why he was there, to believe maybe he had changed. But the stronger part of her, the part she had, fought tooth and nail to reclaim, whispered, "Keep walking." Jean looked up then. Their eyes met across the busy street. His face lit up for a moment, like he thought this was fate, like he thought she had come looking for him. Linda smiled politely, a small closed-lip smile, the kind you give a stranger you'll never see again. And then she turned and walked away. Jean didn't follow. He just stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, too late to fix what he had broken beyond repair. Linda didn't look back, not even once. The evening air felt different when Linda stepped off the subway near Betty's apartment. It was lighter somehow, even though the city was still buzzing and honking, and alive in the way it always was. Maybe it wasn't the world that had changed. Maybe it was just her. Betty was waiting on the stoop. 2 takeout boxes balanced on her knees, and a bottle of cheap wine tucked under her arm. When she spotted Linda, she grinned so wide it practically split her face. "You look like you just won a damn trophy," Betty called out. Linda laughed as she jogged up the steps. "I think I might have." She plopped down next to her, grabbing a takeout box and prying it open. "The interview went amazing. I think they actually liked me for me, not because I watered myself down." Betty bumped her shoulder against Linda's. "Of course they liked you. You're finally showing up as the real deal." They ate on the steps, swapping bites and sipping straight from the wine bottle, ignoring the curious stares from people passing by. Linda told her every detail about the interview, the questions, the way she had answered, the tiny nods and smiles she caught from the interviewers. "And guess what?" Linda said, her eyes sparkling now. "They said they'll call tomorrow. They sounded serious." Betty let out a low whistle. "Girl, you're about to glow up so hard. Jean's gonna need sunglasses just to think about you." At the mention of Jean, Linda's smile faltered for the briefest moment. She hadn't told Betty about seeing him earlier, about the way he stood there, small and lost, while she walked away. Maybe one day she would. Or maybe he didn't even deserve that much space anymore. They stayed out there until the sun went down and the streetlights buzzed awake, talking about everything and nothing, weaving plans out of the night air. Linda couldn't remember the last time she had felt so weightless, so full of possibility. Later, lying in the tiny spare room with the window cracked open to the city sounds, Linda let herself think about it. What she wanted, really wanted. Not just survival, not just getting through the day. She wanted joy. Real, stupid, messy joy. Not the kind you have to beg for. Not the kind you have to explain or shrink yourself to fit into. The kind you built with your own hands, brick by brick, with no one standing over your shoulder, telling you what you deserved. She closed her eyes and smiled into the darkness. She could almost see it, shimmering in the distance, like a new city waiting for her. Her own apartment, her own paycheck, her own mornings without the heavy ache of wondering if she was enough. And for the first time in years, she believed she could have it, she would have it, across town. John sat slumped on the couch in his now half-empty apartment. Her perfume was fading from the air. Her toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. Her soft, silly notes, "Have a good day, love you," were nowhere to be found, and the silence was louder than anything he'd ever known. He had spent so long thinking. Linda would always orbit around him, no matter how recklessly he spun. He thought love was just another thing he could take for granted. Like a light you expect will flick on when you flip the switch. He never imagined what it would feel like when the switch stayed dark. John poured himself another drink with shaking hands, staring at the door that wouldn't open again. Not for him, not ever. The next morning, sunlight poured into the tiny bedroom, like a promise. Linda woke up slowly, stretching under the covers, feeling that rare and beautiful weightlessness you only get after shedding something that was never meant for you. She lay there for a few moments, smiling to herself, soaking it all in. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a brief second, her stomach tightened out of old habit. But when she picked it up and saw the number flashing across the screen, it wasn't Jean, it was the agency. Linda took a deep breath and answered. "Hi, Linda," said a bright voice on the other end. "We'd like to offer you the position. Full-time benefits. Starting Monday, if you're available." Linda pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the noise that wanted to burst out. She managed to say something coherent, to accept, to thank them before hanging up and just sitting there, stunned. She had done it. Not Jean. Not anyone else. Her. When she ran into the kitchen, waving her phone like a maniac, Betty knew without even asking. She screamed and hugged Linda so hard they nearly toppled over the couch. "You're a badass," Betty crowed, dancing around the room in her pajamas. "You're a freaking legend," Linda laughed until she couldn't breathe, the sound tearing out of her chest, wild and free. Later that afternoon, they celebrated the only way Betty knew how. Bad pizza, bad wine, and a playlist of early 2000s girl anthems blasting through the apartment. Linda looked around at the cluttered living room, the cheap plastic cups, the horrible singing, and realized something so simple, so stunning. She was happy. Not fake happy. Not convince yourself it's enough. Happy. Real happy. The kind that fills you up from the inside and leaves no room for regret. Jean tried to call once that night. She let it ring out without even a flicker of hesitation. She didn't need to hear his voice. She didn't need his apologies, his explanations, his heavy little chains disguised as love. She was already gone. Jean could sit in that half-empty apartment, surrounded by all the things he thought mattered. The nice TV, the designer sneakers, the cold bed, and realize too late that none of it could love him back. Linda wasn't a thing you could replace. She was a wildfire you were stupid enough to think you could control. Weeks later, when Linda signed the lease to her own small studio apartment, she didn't even feel scared. She painted the walls herself, bought secondhand furniture with Betty's help, and filled the space with plants and light and every version of herself she had buried for so long. One night, standing in her little kitchen, barefoot, music playing low, a glass of wine in her hand, she realized something that made her smile so deeply. It ached. She had finally deleted more than just the memories. She had deleted the version of herself who thought she wasn't enough, and in her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone free. The girl who once stayed silent when a boy mocked her love was gone. And the woman who rose from her ashes? She was just getting started.